Okay, we are live.
We are. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Fireside Chats. Welcome to our last Fireside Chats. Before the elections, it's what 3 days to go. It's 3 days to go. And as you can hear from my voice, I'm tired. Like I'm tired, but we don't stop. My name is Khaopalelwe Palaitile. I am the Digital Campaigns Manager at Rise Mzansi. And this is Ask Songezo, where you have your final chance to actually ask him questions before you go to the polls. You're sitting at home wondering, okay, I've heard about Rise Mzansi, or you know about Rise Mzansi, but you're wondering, what more is there? But firstly, before we go into that, we want to apologize for being late. We were supposed to start at 7:30. We did start late because we've had some technical errors, but here we are and we don't stop. Dasongs, how are you doing?
I'm also tired, so I'm good at the same time.
You're tired but feeling good at the same time.
Yeah.
That's great. You're tired because you come from home. Can we reflect on homecomings? You were in Mkanduli. I hope I'm saying it right after many visits now. How was Mkanduli and how was your experience being at home and having a homecoming event?
So, how thanks very much. So let me just talk about, for those who don't know, what the homecomings are. So all the Rise Mzansi candidates, from myself all the way to provincial candidates, but particularly for the NLC, we did homecomings, which means as we wrap up this election, we go back to where you're from, or at least to your community, and you sign the pledge, the Rise Mzansi pledge for this election in front of the people that love you, that have made you who you are in many ways. So I went back to Mkanduli this past weekend to do just that. And it was a joyous occasion. It was very emotional for me, how, because it was a family reunion in many ways, and there were also old friends that I hadn't seen in a very long time. But it was wholesome, and I left there not just being emotional, but feeling very, very energized again to do the final stretch of this election.
Awesome. I mean, I was there. It was very touching and emotional to see. But I also think it was very important. And talking about Mkanduli, I've had the privilege and the pleasure of being at some of your activities and events, following you around with the team. And one of the things you do a lot is you talk about Mkanduli. You make examples of Mkanduli to a point where sometimes I'm like, what about us from Rustenburg or from the Northwest, from the dry city and the dry land? Why is it so important for you to continuously talk about Mkanduli? I know it's where you're from, but why is it so important that you use it as an example when talking about the issues that South Africans face?
So, rural areas are forgotten in politics. Even when we have discourse or policy conversations that are about inclusion and including Black people in particular, township economy has now become part of a common language, but the rural areas are often forgotten. And yet, for me, it is what formed me as a person. I spent every day of the first 14 years of my life living in the village. And by the time you are 14, much of who you are is formed. And so it's very important for me to highlight Mkanduli because it's a representation of many rural areas across South Africa and bring up the color and the stories and the experiences of people that are in rural areas to say they also matter. We must not forget them. They're as important as the people in the suburbs or people in townships or informal settlements and so on.
Absolutely. So we have questions that people asked on the timeline when we posted earlier today. We're gonna get to those, but I think we're just setting the scene before we get to those. I think there's particularly very important. But before we go to that, I want to come back again to the campaign trail. It's been what, over a year? I mean, you've been out, you've been everywhere, you've been across all 9 provinces. You're the, the people from your community were saying you're the busiest man they know because they see you on TV there and there and there. um, who are you talking to? Who is a Rise Mzansi voter? Who is the typical person who comes to your community meetings that are under trees? We've been in tents, we've been in halls. Who are these people and why them?
So, and I will speak as somebody who lives in a suburb in Tshwane, right? And say it's the people whose lives we tend to think we understand, but often we do not really understand because we don't live them. And the privilege of having been over the last year in all manner of communities, whether it is informal settlements or villages and even the suburbs, is you get to see how people experience the same issues differently depending on where they're situated and what their problems are. Quick example how is that for us in the urban areas where you've got electricity, load shedding is about the inconvenience of being not being able to cook, not being able to have lights, and so on. In many communities, when there's load shedding, you are very unsafe. You can't walk, you're going to get robbed, you're going to get mugged, you might get stabbed, you get shot, and so on. So when people talk about load shedding, you realize that it's all the problems you have, plus more that other people experience. And that has enriched me, it's enriched my colleagues, and it has enriched our campaign and Rise Mzansi as an organization.
It's interesting also because one of my biggest observations on the campaign trail is that a lot of the Rise Mzansi meetings are attended by women and
Yeah,
mothers,
yeah.
grandmothers, and young women, young black, white, colored, working class women. And Rise Mzansi then talks about a tax relief for single mothers. What can you remind us, for those who don't know and for those who do know, what came about the tax relief for single mothers and why does our manifesto actually look into the issues of women, particularly, and supporting them?
So, one of the things we encourage people to do is to discuss anything that is bothering them, anything at all. So we don't categorize issues. We don't say, okay, that's a criminal justice issue or that is a social issue or whatever. No, anything that bothers you is really important. And where we ended up is a type of politics that really digs deep into people's lives and has a granularity of the issues that affect them. And I'll make just 2 examples. The second being the single mothers issue. The very first meeting that we had once we launched Rise Mzansi, I think it was on the 20th of April, if I remember well, in Mdantsane, the first big contribution was about mental health. It was from a young person, and that young person today is a Rise Mzansi volunteer, and she's still with it because we didn't say to her, oh, that's a social issue. It's not as important as expropriation and so on. So let's deal with it another time. We said your concern matters. It's valid. We're going to make it central to our politics and we're going to take it forward. That's one example. So women in South Africa have the burden of care. And even when the woman and the man in the house, if it's a couple like that, don't work, the children still look at the woman to provide the food, even if they've got nothing. So the woman has to make a plan, something, whatever it is. And we recognize that there are different types of struggles that women go through as the primary caregivers in our homes. And when the women are single, in other words, they're a single parent, it is especially difficult for them to do that. And that's how we came to the conclusion that you need to have packages that are very conscious, policy packages that is, that are very conscious of the burden and the challenges that women in particular have. And we must respond to those because our politics is supposed to be responsive.
Absolutely. And one of the criticisms that has come into play, specifically to the tax relief for single mothers, has been what about single fathers? What about men? And even more, people have asked a very interesting question of, or rather commented and said, doesn't this promote becoming a single mom? Why would you want to give tax relief? It reminds me of the whole argument around teenagers have children to get a grant, which was
Yeah.
beat back years ago. How do we respond to, because I do think we do live in a country where, even some men, are marginalized in a certain way and can't afford. I mean, look at the unemployment rate. What do we say in a manifesto around family and particularly fathers and single fathers as well?
So the beauty of all of this is that it covers single fathers as well. You don't have as many single fathers as you have single mothers. That's just a fact. Even in instances where someone is a single father, in many cases, the primary caregiver of the children is still the mother, right? So you've got to recognize it. But there are different types of single parenthood. Some people are looking after their nephews and nieces because the sister or brother has passed on and they're having to look after those kids. They would qualify for something like that. Some people are older siblings. You're 25, you're 30, your younger siblings are still kids, so you have to look after them, take them to school and that sort of thing. You also qualify for something like that. Same as single fathers. So what I'm trying to say is highlighting the struggles of single mothers is important. It's like saying Black Lives Matter. You can't turn around and say all lives matter. No, you know what we mean. Don't act funny now. So when we talk about single mothers, it's symbolic of single parenthood because women are the primary caregivers to children in our country. And people shouldn't feel worried that there's discrimination going on here. No, there's nothing like that.
It's like saying to redress what happened to Black people, it's discriminating on white people, but in actual fact, it's equity, it's balancing, and supporting. Covering the same question, Buibilo on WhatsApp, when we earlier posted that we are having this conversation with you, wanted to ask you a very specific question. And it's around the 2021 report from Gauteng. I think it was Gauteng Health, if not Education, on the 23,000 young women or teenagers and even adolescents, underage children, like from the ages of 10. I remember working on a report like this as a journalist. It was from the Department of Education. And she's asking, how will Rise Mzansi sort of tackle the issue of adolescent, I hate saying teenage pregnancy, but adolescent pregnancies and young children who get to become mothers and require the support that we speak about? How do we do?
So how this is a multi-layered issue, but let's start with the obvious one. When a child who is under 16 becomes pregnant, especially by an adult, it's not a child pregnancy, it's rape. It's a child who becomes pregnant as a result of rape. That person is not old enough to meaningfully consent to to being in a sexual relationship with anyone, including people of their age. But in particular, when there is an older person involved, in other words, an adult, that's really like a criminal issue, which also means there is a lot that we need to do to address various forms of male violence against children, against girl children, and against women. Because in some instances, you find that people don't quite realize how violent it is to take advantage of young people in that way, even if they've consented in inverted commas. They haven't. So we kind of got to deal with that. The second thing is that we also need to understand the sort of the socioeconomic influences that also make young people vulnerable to this kind of thing from predatory adults who take advantage of them with enticements and that kind of thing. So there is a lot that involves education, change in behavior. And by education, I don't mean in a fluffy way, but like serious change in behavior, particularly from men, but also the ability to have honest conversations with children about these matters and how to prevent them. But I think ultimately we have to make sure that we create an environment that is safe, that is nurturing, and so on. There is also another important issue, which is access to what I call abortion care, which is legal in South Africa. Because often, and one of the things that educated me is also on one of these journeys around the country, and now I'm giving a long answer, is a kind of health effects long-lasting health effects that young mothers, like 14, 15 years old, go through as a result of having been pregnant at a very young age. And we tend to treat abortion care as a moral issue. It actually is a serious medical issue that we have to take seriously and understand the full spectrum of circumstances that we deal with. And I think our health and education systems need to work together to respond adequately to all of this so that families and communal structures are supportive of an environment that prevents adolescence and pregnancy on the one hand, but also has appropriate responses for families and kids who also are in a similar situation.
Thank you for that. And I think it's also a question of dealing with poverty and inequality, because one of the things that the Department of Education said was that leading causes was obviously patriarchy, but also poverty that makes young girls, women vulnerable. And speaking about that, we travel a lot, like we said, and one of the things that I've picked up that we come across is women who are mothers, who are caregivers, who are over 35. And that's one of the issues that Rise has been so intentional about the fact that once they turn 35 or they're over 35, they don't get the job opportunities that they require and need. And they've said that really loudly. And we picketed against that. Why was it so important when we have such high youth unemployment in the country to also prioritize over 35s?
So I think, and for me, it's not even an also how, it's just is the imperative that we should have. So for those who don't know, when youth unemployment became a topical issue, we had the highest youth unemployment in the world, we still do, and it was in newspapers on a regular basis and so on, it became embarrassing for the ANC government. So they altered the rules and the policy around hiring of people, especially in the expanded public works program and certain entry-level jobs, especially at municipal, local and district municipality level. So what actually happens is that for most for people 35 and older, in particular women for whom being primary caregivers, it's a life and death situation, they are simply told, we can't hire you. We have to start with those who are between the ages of 18 and 35 and 34. And yet when you are 35 years old, you probably have children, whether you are male or female, you've got children, you're looking after elderly parents, you're looking after, there's lots of responsibilities that you have. And for those people, we destroy their hope of building a better life by saying, we are going to exclude you on the basis of something you cannot change, and that is being 35 years or older. We oppose that as Rise Mzansi. Our responsibility is to make sure there's work opportunities for everybody, whether you are 45 or 22. If you qualify to work and you want to work, you must be able to get work and be treated fairly.
Thank you for that. If you've just joined us, we are live on YouTube, X, and Facebook, and thank you for joining us. You can continue to send your questions. You see me looking somewhere. I'm actually looking at my phone and I'm looking at all your questions that are coming through. So just hashtag Ask Songezo. There's a team in the office that's actually fielding your questions towards me, but you can also actually put your questions on the chat. This is your opportunity to ask the national leader of Rise Mzansi ahead of the elections. We are all going to vote. And if you're undecided and you want to be convinced, the man is here. He's ready to answer your questions. So, moving from the over 35s, Rise Mzansi talks a lot about, and I want to put them together because we have quite a lot of questions to get through. But we talk about the hunger issue, the water issue. You've touched on the alcohol and drug abuse issue a little bit. And the question I want to ask is, why has it been so important? And I think you've answered it a bit, but you can expand on it. Why has it been so important to focus on the issues that you get at communities? Because one of the criticisms that people kind of have against Rise is, there are high-level issues which should be taken care of. The people on the ground are hungry. They can't tell you how to solve problems. You need to tell them how to solve problems.
So, in South Africa, we've convinced ourselves that the job is a solution to everything. So the only thing you talk about in politics is jobs. Jobs are very important. I agree. it makes you, it helps you to earn an income, to build a life, and it's really important. So please, people should not misunderstand. However, there are things that are very important for the sustenance of life. Food is important. It's nearly impossible to look for a job, especially where jobs are so rare, on an empty stomach. It's really difficult. And millions of South Africans have one meal a day, perhaps two, but definitely not 3 meals a day. And that food is often not nutritious because they have to battle to make ends meet and so on. So we need to recognize that that's a primary issue and we have to respond to it. And there are various proposals on the table from Rise Mzansi and from others in recognition of this. But a job on its own does not help you when your community has no water. You can have a job. You can get, I don't know, you can get like food vouchers, you can get all manner of programs, basic income grant and so on. There's still no water. They're not going to help you. And the struggle for people who have no water is real. Let me give how an example with my homecoming in Mkanduli yesterday. There was a lady, an older lady, who'd come from one of the villages, Echiklini, where I've got some of my grandmother's family. And she came. How she told me that because of the water issue, she went to get water at 4 a.m. She had to get up at 4 a.m. so that she could kind of do her morning things. And then once she's done, she has to go and fetch water again and then leave it so that the people that remain behind there can have water to drink and so on. Those are the lives that people live. It's not on. We can't do that. So we need to solve and respond immediately to the issues that are very, very basic. And for the smart people here, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you take care of the bottom. What we tend to do is we focus on the self-actualization right at the top. Please, let's focus on the basics. Food and water are basics, and millions don't have them.
Absolutely. I just got a note that there was shuffling sound, I think, when I'm speaking. So I apologize for that. I just moved my thing. The other thing that we've done is we've released a couple of papers that propose to bring solutions to the very same problems that you've articulated. And one of the papers we launched was the vision for the economy paper, the jobs. What do we call it? The
jobs and economy.
Yes, thank you so much. And one of the things I want to ask, and a lot of people are asking on the timeline, is how do we propose to firstly grow the economy before we even talk about, grow an economy that can create those jobs? And I know that you speak a lot about how even service delivery creates jobs.
Yeah, so I think it's really important for the economy to grow. And I want to clarify something. I'm not saying let's wait for the economy to grow. I'm just saying a growing economy is good for creating sustainable jobs. So the economy has to grow. Ours is not growing. So we must understand why it is not growing. In short, we do not have reliable electricity. And where it's available, it's very expensive. I think everyone who buys electricity will know that it is very expensive. But the reliability is an issue because it means that businesses and families have to spend extra money in one way or the other to make up. And that money could go to productive parts of the economy. That's one. The second part is our national logistics infrastructure, rail and road in particular. It is not just Transnet. Rail is really important, but the road network, especially at a regional and local level. You know the R101 that goes through Pretoria and runs parallel to the N1. People who drive that road would know that to run any business in the areas alongside the R101 must be terrible. It's challenging because the road is so bad, right? So we have to fix that infrastructure. The third thing we have to work on very hard is crime. And again, I'm going to talk about local investors. I come from Mthatha and Mkanduli, okay? We were in Mthatha, as you know. On Thursday, there was taxi violence where there was a shootout at 3 p.m. 3 people dead, about 14 seriously injured in hospital at 3 p.m. in the CBD. Now, you can't start a cash business. There are extortion gangs also. I think I showed you a few filling stations that are shuttered because of extortion gangs in Mthatha. When you have crime, it is difficult to create commercial opportunities. So we've got to do that. And these are just three of the constraints. According to the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee, and they're releasing another statement this week, if we were to deal with these issues, just these three, you can release about 3% GDP growth. It would take us to 4%, which feels like a miracle. And that's before you've done many of the interventions that we talk about in our jobs paper. So we need to understand why the economy is not growing, and those are some of the reasons. Finally, how we are talking about raising 300 billion from a wealth tax, and again, we're not saying people are struggling at 750,000 rand a year. I know it's a lot of money, but people have got like 8-9 dependents that they look after. So it might sound like a lot of money. It's not. We're really talking about the really top wealthy people. You can raise that kind of money from those people. We use it to invest in this infrastructure that we need in order to deliver services to businesses and homes. Just by doing that, you stimulate the economy and it starts growing. You hire people, you create employment, they start spending, they pay tax, then kind of the economy grows in that way.
Thank you. And I just wanted to correct the paper for anybody who's interested in going to read it, which is on our website, is Vision for a New and Just Economy. Yeah, and you can find it on our website. If you've just joined us, this is the Ask Songezo Fireside Chats, which is the last Fireside Chats we're going to have until elections, which is in 3 days. So if you have questions, please put them on the chat. We still have quite a lot of time to field some questions. I'm going to ask you a question from Tando, who sent us on WhatsApp. It's quite long, but I'm going to try and make it concise. Tando says, how do you as Rise Mzansi's leader plan on changing the lack of diversity within corporate governance? Lack of diversity and representation within boards is a problem within the country. And this means that we don't get to have new players coming into the scene, and it deprives Black professionals of a chance to offer their technical skills. It goes on and on, but I think you get the gist.
I get the gist of it, and it's a really important issue. And there are different versions of this question. So when I'm talking to white people, they say, hey, what are your views on BEE? As in, are you going to get rid of BEE? And usually they talk about employment equity. So I also want to say the term diversity and representativity is really important because it's not just black and white. There are also gender issues. For instance, women earn less than men, and this is fact, earn less than men for doing similar work, similar level of expertise, and so on. They're more likely to be discriminated against when it comes to promotions, when it comes to salary increases, bonuses, and so on. I'm not speculating on this. I was a senior manager and executive in the corporate sector. It is objectively true, right? And we can't have a situation like that. There is an assumption that, and I think it's largely true, that when your decision-making structures are diverse, then you are over time going to have less of these because you've got people who understand how it feels to be in that situation of disadvantage. There are two interventions. Intervention number one is to make sure that the Employment Equity Act, the principles and the practice of it is applied as it should be in law. But that does not go alone, right? It goes with the quality of leadership that you have. Because you also need to drive a process of change in the corporate sector by leading the leaders in the corporate sector. Legislation on its own does not change attitudes. It might help to change some of the behaviors. It does not change attitudes, and people tend to look for loopholes. One of the things we've failed to do is to drive leaders of different sectors of society, to bring them together, to work towards building the society that we want to be. It must be embarrassing to have a board that is not diverse. It must be embarrassing to have an exco that is not diverse and management that is not diverse. That's a more powerful weapon than legislation, because legislation always have loopholes. People can always pay fines and that kind of thing. And ultimately, you're not going to jail companies for, executives for not appointing people. It's not realistic. So there are these two interventions, but overall, we support representativity, employment equity, 100%.
Thank you so much. Tando has another question, and it's around entrepreneurship. And she's asking, what is your plan for small business development?
So, quick answer is that there are three things that are needed. Number one is the kind of knowledge that people need when you start in business. You haven't run a business before, you're entrepreneurial, you've got great ideas and so on. You need the knowledge support, the mentoring, and the coaching and the guidance, and the development of plans to make your dream a reality. That support that South Africans often don't have in the quality of the support that they need. So that is the first thing. The second thing is access to finance. We talk about patient finance, where on the basis that you've got the right idea, you have got the right level of support, you get loans on friendly terms, which you do not have to start repaying for 12 months, and the government fills the gap in that 12 months so that your business can get on its feet, and you can then start paying back those loans, paying tax, and that sort of thing. And we've actually also said that we want to increase the tax-free revenue of small businesses so that you create a lot more breathing room for businesses to create jobs and that sort of thing. So that's how we think about support for entrepreneurs. It's not just money, it's a whole range of other solutions that entrepreneurs need.
In that question, I want you to reflect back at, I think it was Monday when you were at the 702 debate.
Yeah.
And we cut a clip and we put it on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And you were actually speaking about the idea that the only thing that Black people can do or are capable of doing is owning spaza shops. And I think because the clip was cut off, could take your time to kind of explain what you were talking about when you were saying, Black people are not just good enough for spaza shops, and give us like a bit of context now that we're talking about business and small business.
So the conversation was about the township economy, and the ANC kept talking about spaza shops, Mzansi Masi. And this was irritating for me because it gives the impression that the only thing people in townships can do as a business is a spaza shop. No, it's not. There are many things. People can open restaurants, they can get into the entertainment industry, somehow do different kind of things, cultural activities, tourism, and so on. Black people don't just do spaza shops only. Black people can do many things, not just in the townships, but they need to be able to get into the Sandton economy and into the CBD of Cape Town economy and so on, not just stay in the townships and try and make money in the township. That was a point that I was making. And I said we need to start thinking prosperity instead of these small little things, crumbs that we think Black people should get out of the economy, and that they're only limited to certain things such as spaza shops. Spaza shops are really important, but our horizon now has got to expand. We can't be talking only spaza shops when we talk about economic activity for Black people. No, please, that's demeaning.
I absolutely agree with that. One of the other things I want you to touch on, I think I mentioned it earlier. You speak a lot about how we can also offer skills in the communities we live in and create jobs in the communities we live in using service delivery. You talk about solar panels. Can you just expand that for us as well? How do we do that? And what do you tell people on the ground?
So what we tell people on the ground is that the mere act of putting in place the basic services they need does two things. It stimulates economic activity in that it injects cash into those areas, and people start where so people work on these projects, they get paid, they start buying in those communities, and so that is the first thing. The second thing is it creates an economic infrastructure as well, so that people who thought that they would not invest in a certain area because the roads are bad, there's no water, and so on, suddenly they want to invest in those areas because those problems have been solved. So service delivery is actually good for job creation and economic growth. But we also want to respond to real practical problems. People complain that 100 Rand worth of electricity, like last you a couple of days if you are lucky and you're using your electricity very carefully. So clearly affordability of electricity is a problem. But there is an opportunity therein as well, because what you want to do is you want to reduce the reliance on the grid on paid electricity, which is why we've got this idea that we must aspire to, within a decade, place solar panels on every home or small business structure that qualifies for social panels, for solar panels. Again, the investment in that capacity to produce solar panels, to distribute solar panels, to install solar panels, to maintain solar technology and so on, creates a whole economic ecosystem that we didn't have before. And when you take that together with roads and other forms of network and other infrastructure, including telephony, you can have South Africa buzzing at 6 to 7% economic growth. And we can reach that goal of 3 million jobs in 5 years that we say is possible.
Absolutely. Talking about service delivery, there's a question from Tabo on X. I'm so not used to saying X. I want to say Twitter. And this has to do also, these things are so interlinked, right? It has to do with spatial planning, it has to do with economy, it has to do with service delivery. And we talk a lot about having, clinics and health facilities. I think it's, within a distance, 15 minutes or 10 minutes away. You'll expand on that. But what Tabo was asking is, how are you going to revive our ailing health system? But he also adds education system.
Sure, you, Tabo, is asking me to give a long answer, so I'll try and keep it concise now. And let's just talk about health in particular. So let me share Mzansi's philosophy of health. We'd like people to get less sick because they are healthier and they live healthier lives physically and mentally, which is why community infrastructure is so important. The availability of food is so important. The availability of clean water is so important. The ability to produce and have access to healthy food and ways to exercise, whether it is biking lanes or running lanes in communities, all of this is super, super important, especially in respect of the non-communicable diseases. So it's important that people understand that Rise Mzansi has an expansive view of health and well-being in general. But there's a couple of deficiencies we have in our health system. First of all, and this is in no order of importance, first of all, something like mental health, for instance, or substance abuse, they kind of treat it as kind of side issues, a niche, they're not part of the whole equation of health. Take those, put those in the center, because people go through a lot in South Africa. It's not just substance abuse, it's other forms of mental struggles that people have. The public health system must be able to respond, which means training adequately trained staff. We don't have enough of. We need to do that. We need to pay them, and we need to pay them well. And we need to expand these services to all the healthcare facilities that we have, or as many as possible, in our local communities. The second thing is, we're saying as a rule, as a standard, everybody must be 15 minutes away from a public health facility that caters for 90% of their needs. In the event that somebody needs a sort of beyond primary health care in that sort of thing, we are also saying we believe in universal access to healthcare. And that means regardless of whether you've got medical aid or not, it must be possible for you to go to a private doctor, private hospital, and so on, to get the kind of specialized care that you need, and that the government, by legislation, should facilitate that, which is why we have got qualified support for the NHI, but we insist that it's not a silver bullet. The public health system must remain the primary giver and provider of health services to all South Africans. Because if we fall into the trap of thinking something like the NHI is a silver bullet, I know South Africa. It will be like the security industry. There will be lots of private healthcare facilities which cut corners, which get paid by the NHI, and people complain afterwards. We must have health services that are owned by the government, and they must be as good as a private health facility, so that people who are paying 7,000-8,000 Rand medical aid can downgrade it and take the 1,500 Rand option and save that money and go to a public hospital. So that's our vision of health. How?
Thank you. And I think I do want you to touch on the education part, because one of the things that's come out strong is that people don't really know what's Rise's view or proposals around education. But we talk a
Education.
lot about ECDs, right? And I want you to start there. We talk about a lot about ECDs. And I want you to start there when you do answer the question.
Thanks for that guidance. How actually, I mean, we the first 7 years of a child's life are important. And the other thing I want to explain is that Rise Mzansi's approach to policy is interconnected like this. So you see, when we're talking about food and access to water, if you take a province like the Eastern Cape, 27% of kids suffer from stunting, and they become the so-called special needs children, which means they can actually just never get out of the poverty trap because they're not able to kind of reach a level of comprehension that you need to survive in a modern economy. So please, that whole thing I was talking about with health and well-being and access to basic services and health is part of the intervention you need from day one of a child's life, so that the education outcomes are as good as they need to be. The second thing is, we also believe, in particular in the context of supporting women, working women, to be able to go look for work, to find work and so on. It's not just daycare facilities that change nappies and make sure that the kid is safe and fed. It's ECD, proper ECD facilities. In our travels around the country, we've come across hundreds of women who are trying to do this on their own with limited or no government support. And we believe a caring government should do that, so that by the time a child enters formal schooling, they enter a school also that is well run, the teachers are present, the principal is the kind of quality leader that is needed in a school, the school governing body is functioning and guiding that school and helping and protecting that school in the community, and the curriculum in that school helps children to develop the kind of skills the South African economy needs now and is going to need in the future. And we particularly use internet technology to give kids, especially in rural areas, access to the kind of teaching and teaching materials that are simply not available in rural schools in particular. And I must tell you how I come from a family of teachers, and there are many teachers in my family ecosystem, in my community. There are instances where the teachers basically give marks to kids because they don't have internet, they don't have smartphones, they don't have data, and so on. So there is a shared communal infrastructure that you need in terms of network and infrastructure and telephony, which helps to improve access to education.
Thank you for that. One of the things that really shocked me recently was the amount of kids that go to remedial school. I had never looked into it until I had to. The amount of kids who can't read, who have to be taken back. We're moving towards leadership. Tumbeza on Twitter or X wants to know, what's the first item? We've spoken about a lot of things on the agenda for President Songezo Zibi. Where do we start fixing South Africa when you are elected as honorable Mr. President?
I know Tumbeza, by the way, is my brother-in-law, but anyway. But he's deeply interested in politics. So thank you for that question. So we believe, and I really believe this personally as well, that if we were to solve the leadership problem in South Africa, a lot of the challenges that we have would become better. Why do I say that? You need people who take decisions for the right reason, apply those decisions in the right way, implement those decisions in the right way, and get the best people they can find to make sure that those decisions and choices are applied properly for the benefit of the South African people. So that means both the politicians and the public servants are not just both conscientious, but they have certain management and leadership and technical skills. It is difficult to oversee a group of professionals who are highly educated and knowledgeable on some subject and you know nothing about it, either as a parliamentarian, as a minister. So the quality of the leadership that we have is important. But I also want to talk about the unsaid, which is leadership is not just legislating. You need the personal credibility to be able to bring differing stakeholders in the whole country or within a particular sector to work towards common goals. And we are no longer able to do that in South Africa now. And you talk about the social compact, nobody trusts the leadership in South Africa, and therefore people don't do things voluntarily as they should, because when people act voluntarily, things tend to happen a lot faster. But they can only happen where there is a shared vision and the leadership is credible. So, Tumeza, Mbuso, it's really important that we get high quality leaders, such as what you find at Rise Mzansi, so that we can do both the intangible and the tangible bit of the work, so that South Africa can move forward.
And that is why we say we need new leaders.
Leaders.
Talking about leadership, and I love that we are at this question. I had a question, but let's move to people's questions. Joe asks, many political leaders in South Africa beg for our votes before the election, which is something we get on the ground a lot.
Yeah.
And when they're in parliament, they hide. You never see them again. How is Rise Mzansi going to ensure that the leadership that Joe votes for on the 29th of May are accountable to him and stay accountable to him?
So I spoke about the homecoming yesterday in Mqanduli. Voice did his, Lawrence has done his, David has done his, other candidates have done similarly. It's an undertaking from us at Rise Mzansi that we will behave ethically, we'll subject ourselves to lifestyle audits. The infrastructure that supports us will always be accessible to voters, including ourselves. I need to emphasize this how. I don't think it's possible for a private representative to take all the calls that are directed at them personally. They would sit at their desk and never do anything else and still not take enough calls or have time to do something about the issues that people are talking about. Two things are important as far as access. People need to have a platform where they can reach you. And that's why Parliament gives you an infrastructure as a public representative. And secondly, when it's constituency time, go back and actually do town hall meetings and talk to people, tell them what's happening in Parliament, what it means for them, ask them what you need to say for them. So that's the one part of it, which is about access. The second part of it is we are trying to institutionalize this how by changing the law. That is why we want electoral reform, for instance, that forces parliamentary representatives to go back as a KPI and report back to people, have meetings, good quality meetings in a designated district, which is part of the electoral system. If you don't do that work, you get removed from parliament and there's a by-election and somebody else is elected. That would force elected representatives to not disappear for 5 years.
So people are not getting your WhatsApp number or your email address.
No. There needs to be an email address in which people can be reached. I mean, for instance, and one of the things I tell people, including my friends, people try and WhatsApp me directly. They wait a long time. But if they, it's directed to the office, it gets processed and then people are able to get the response. But I get why people want to talk to a leader or a representative directly. We must be honest, though. There are instances which cry out for direct access to a leader. And we must have a politics where that is possible.
That would be remarkable. Talking about leadership, accountability, Maibuye on Twitter, on X, asks, number one thing I want to hear is a clear explanation of Rise Mzansi's funding sources and recent allegations. I'm very interested in voting for Rise, but I'm not voting for some. And he continues.
Right. Okay. So Rise Mzansi has, at last count, about 550 donors. If I'm correct, it's not less. It's more than 550 donors, right? And there are different types of donors that give to us. Out of that 550, some people are kind of once in a while donors who give anything from 10 rand upwards, but people don't give 10 rand. They give way more than 10 rand anyway. So that's the one type. The second type of donor is what we call a recurring donor. And these are people who pay by debit order. So for instance, I'm a recurring donor to Rise Mzansi. For instance, there are lots of people who pay 1,000 rand, 2,000 rand, 3, 4, 5, whatever the amount is per month to Rise Mzansi in order to support the work that we do. Then there is a small number of people who really have means, who are able to provide to Rise Mzansi. And people are usually concerned with the big donors. I want to say, the person who's giving us 2,000 rand a month deserves as much influence as a person who's given us 1 million or 5 million or 50 million. Because for the person who can afford only 1,000 rand a month, that is a lot of money that they are giving over to us so that we can do this work, right? So that's important. What is our approach to fundraising? When we started, we published a document that we called our politics document. You can find it on our website, risemzansi.org / I think policies / our politics, somewhere thereabouts. But go to policies and documents on our website. In there is an ideological declaration which says what we stand for. It's a long document. I think it's between 25 and 30 pages. I encourage people who are interested in the funding question to read it because it deals with many things. Here's the deal. When we approach people for funding, and I also need to say this, the belief that people just phone up Songezo and say, hey, we want to give you money in case you do this. No, it's hard. Out of 10 people that you speak to for funding, how? Only 1.5 end up giving you something. The rest of them don't. Usually, for reasons related to this document. In other words, I want you guys to join the Moonshot Coalition. Okay, in that case, then, we're not going to be able to join the Moonshot Coalition and we lose out on that money. Okay, so that's one example. Other people is quibble with certain things. There are people who do not want our position on gender and marriage equality because they don't believe that same-sex couples should exist. They've got an issue. They don't agree. So it's sharp. We can't help you. So people need to be clear that this is the deal. And the few people that are able to donate large sums of money to Rise Mzansi do so on the understanding that they agree or at least have no problem with what we've put in that document. The test South Africans should apply how is whether we do anything that contradicts the founding document of Rise Mzansi, in as far as what our politics is about. Now, some people accuse us of sort of supporting white people, but the DA fear mongers about us and says we are the EFF and that kind of thing. So you find these contradictions that don't make sense to me. What we endeavor to do how, finally, is to make sure that we declare our donations. The reason people get upset about, and they get worked out, I don't know whether they get upset or not, is because we've declared it. It's now out in the open. Elections cost money, and I want to address this directly, and I know I'm giving a long answer. This is how political parties handle funding, political party funding. This is why they're able to do so much and have billboards and take television ads and so on and declare this much money. They take money in cash. They get some of these people to pay directly to suppliers for them. Some political parties use government money because they've got access to the government and they can get kickbacks and this kind of thing, right? If you look at this declaration that we have now, there are entities that are just a set of numbers and a few letters that have donated millions of rands to political parties. So let us have this conversation about party political funding. But I also feel that in some instances, it's not a principled conversation. I've explained what our principles are, how, and I think the test that people should provide should apply. Are you now doing something different to what you said you would be doing in the beginning? And my answer is no. But in the event that you feel that we aren't, please tell us what that is. You simply disagreeing with us about our position on one or other thing is not an aspect of funding. It's because we disagree with you on the principle that is involved. If you want us to leave people dying in hospitals because they're immigrants and they're not from South Africa. That's not who we are. It's not about funding. We disagree with you, right? So that's how it works now. I know I've given a long answer, but that's how it works.
Yeah. There are quite a lot of questions. What I will guarantee all of you asking questions that have not been answered is that the team, after this conversation, is going to try and answer these questions directly to you. We did start late, so it is on us, but we do see your questions and we will provide answers to you. We're gonna close soon, but I do want you to tackle some of the questions from YouTube. Just
Sure.
quickly, our view on minimum wage.
People have asked us what's our view on minimum wage. It's law. What do you want us to say? We love it. So, what must happen? Why do we need to say anything on it? There are political parties that say they would remove the minimum wage entirely. We don't agree with that. We must, however, understand that there is a certain South African reality where people go beyond the kind of bargaining structures because somebody's negotiating directly with somebody who's looking for work, and what they're paying them is below the minimum wage, either because they can't afford it and the other person is looking for a job and that sort of thing. There are cases like that, and we must not lie here. I don't think everybody who's watching here pays the person who works in their home according to minimum wage standards. Lots of people do that as well, which is to pay what would be regarded as exploitative wages. However, people also pay what they can afford, and there is that reality. What we are against is saying this kind of reality that exists between people who are struggling, in many cases, must now be accessible to large commercial entities as well. No, actually, no, right? You need to have minimum wages, sectorally determined, that enable people to escape the trap of exploitation that can very easily happen in profiteering.
Talking about minimum wage and exploitation, one of the questions that coming out very strong on YouTube is around our view or proposal or policy on immigration.
So, firstly, how we have an immigration problem in South Africa. The immigration system is broken in many ways. First of all, our borders are porous. I know there is a border management agency, but I want to emphasize this. It's not just the black people who cross the Zambezi from Zimbabwe. There are people walking through the airport here on a tourist visa and they never go back. And they sit here and the government doesn't know who they are. And they drive fancy cars and engage in organized crime with big tattoos and so on. Those are also illegals. So we must be clear and be consistent when we're talking about illegals and not engage in Afrophobia here. But there's an immigration problem. It extends to the offices at Home Affairs, where you find yourself married to a person that you've never met. But there are other problems. There are people who are applying for asylum here in South Africa, and the system does not adequately accommodate them fast enough, and they end up being unlawful in South Africa as well. So we need to fix the entirety of the immigration system, because in its brokenness, we get criminals of all sorts. We also get people who are actually just struggling to survive. We also get asylum seekers who don't get the asylum or refugee status and so on. So we need to fix the immigration system. We need to document everybody who's in South Africa. Why is that important? And people often say, why do you want to document them? Well, how do you know if they're legal or illegal? Are legally or illegally here if you're not documented? You must know who's here, right? So that you can make a decision about what to do with them. So that's important. Thirdly, everybody must get an opportunity to regularize themselves. If you've committed a crime, you go to prison, obviously. If you're working in if you're in business organization or a business that is employing people who are not South African beyond what the law applies, there needs to be accountability there too. In other words, let us just apply South African law as it should be. But please, let us not discriminate against people who are here for asylum purposes. Those people qualify for work permits. People with specialized skills qualify for work permits. We cannot engage in blanket hate of everybody who's not South African. Please, let's not do that. And finally, once you've documented people, and some people need to go and reapply from home, when your borders are secure, You don't just see them back here next week as it happens. And finally, please, let's not take the law into our own hands. We need to fix our government. We need to fix leadership. It needs to apply the law as it should be. Let's not take the law into our own hands. You will be arrested and you will go to jail. And that's unnecessary. It shouldn't happen.
I promise I'm going to let you go soon. But the last...
We can do a few more.
Oh, okay. One of the other questions is, you are probably polling at 0.05%. Why should I vote for you? Will I not be wasting my vote? That came out strong on Facebook, and I see it as well on YouTube. Why should people give RM their votes? You're a new party, small party. Are you going to make a difference?
Yes, we are going to make a difference. But let me first talk about the polling, by the way. Some of the polling, by the way, that gets used behind the scenes is done by DA people. The companies that are used are run by DA people. And the DA's squeeze election strategies don't vote for small political parties. So I'll be very honest with you, I don't trust their honesty. You see those same characters activating against Rise Mzansi on Facebook, but in the background, they own polling companies which supposedly give an unbiased view. They must not take us for fools. We see them, first of all. The second thing is polling is not predictive. It is instructive. What we've seen in polling is that it shows that we are growing at a steady rate since when we started last year. You need the quality of the MP and member of provincial legislature you are going to get from Rise Mzansi. The biggest mistake you can make is to say, because a party is new, right, and I don't know how much support it's going to get in the election, I'm going to go and vote for the same political parties that piss me off. That's not a wise political choice. You need to vote for a political party that agrees with what you believe in your heart. And that gives you the kind of hope that you want. And if everybody does that, especially in an environment where there are so many undecided voters, you will surprise yourself and the political party that you're voting for. That is why we're finishing this campaign strong, and we are going to field a strong team to parliament and provincial legislatures.
Coupled with that question is, Pavish on Facebook asks, if the ANC gets 49% and the MPC gets 49% and Rise gets 1%, who will you give your vote to and why? It also answers the question on YouTube around coalitions.
No, I mean, we've got a principled view around coalitions, and people should not simplify them. And I must say, I'm glad it's being asked on this platform rather than supposedly more knowledgeable people. So who will you pick? In other words, it's about personalities rather than principle. Here's what we believe at Rise Mzansi. First of all, government is not just a government executive, it's also parliament. Being an MP, a speaker, a chief whip, a chairman of a portfolio committee or chairperson of a portfolio committee and so on is part of government. You are in government when you're in parliament. You are governing. You pass laws, you debate them, you amend them, and you pass them, and you conduct oversight. It's government. So that is our view of government. That means we are prepared to play in both spaces, either at the same time or in one space at least, in the event that we end up only doing parliament. So we take the work of parliament and legislatures very seriously. If we do not reach agreement with any political parties about coalitions, we will go to parliament and do the work of the South African people in parliament, right? So that's very important to understand. There are some principles. We will not get into a coalition with political parties where they say in the negotiation, because that's what will happen, that we need to protect corrupt people, facilitate corruption, and look away when corruption is happening. We are not going to do that. So you're not going to be our friend, number one. Number two, we believe in the South African Constitution. If you don't like the South African Constitution, we are not even going to begin the conversation with you, which means political parties that believe the Constitution is bad and we must toss it out, they're out of the question. So that is number two. Number three, we must be mature, get into a room, discuss our priorities, whether we ideologically agree or not. And if it's possible to fashion an agreement where everybody's priorities are catered somehow in terms of service delivery to the South African people, then you can get into a coalition, and you must stay in that coalition for 5 years if everybody keeps their end of the bargain. Collapsing the government every time there's going to be an election because you want a minister to steal money and finance your election is not the game that we're going to play. When we see, if we were to end up in a coalition and we see that happening, we will leave that coalition altogether. We don't need to be ministers. Or there will come a time when Rise Mzansi is the majority, and we'll have all the ministers being Rise Mzansi ministers. We are patient. We are here for a long time.
Thank you. And there are a lot of questions. We are not going to get through all of them. But what we and the team are going to try to do is go through your questions. We still have two more days to go through all the questions. You can continue ask Songezo, and we will continue to bring the answers to you because we still have some time. National Leader, what are your plans for Wednesday as you close, and what is your message to someone sitting listening and saying, I still don't know who to vote for?
So my message is to two types of people. The person who says, I don't know who to vote for, and the person who says, I am not going to vote. Let me start with the latter. Please get up, go and vote. Because when you do not vote, it does not improve whatever it is that has made you so upset. And we're all in the same boat. We're upset. That's why we're doing this. It's not going to improve it by the mere fact of not voting. So I believe that it is important that to choose to use your agency to vote, because the people that are making us angry, that are ignoring us and so on, the old political parties, the establishment, they remain in power is because those of us who are really fed up with everything do not believe that voting can make a difference. Please, your vote will actually make a difference. Please turn up to vote. If you're undecided, here's why you should vote for Rise Mzansi. Everybody complains about leadership in South Africa. We talk about how old the leaders are. We talk about how not innovative they are. We talk about how corrupt they are. The only way we are not going to have that is to test them out democratically. Regime change every 5 years, as our constitution says. So it is really important that you go and you vote for the leaders you deserve, and you'll find them at Rise Mzansi. Those leaders are much younger. They are articulate. They are knowledgeable. They come from communities. They are diverse. They are the future of South Africa as you would love to see it. And we have taken the care and the trouble to dig deep into policy areas and to create a political language and a policy language that is relatable for ordinary South Africans. That's why you talk about single mothers and all of these things. It's because those are the challenges that South Africans have. Rise Mzansi is that kind of organization. And finally, we have resisted the urge to be some breakaway of another political party. People in our organization come from different traditions, from Black consciousness, from the Congress movement, from DA, from civil society and social justice movements and so on. And how can I please talk about that? There is no future in South Africa where we will win by conducting purity tests. And we only believe that we can work with people who 100% agree with us and are like us. It has never happened anywhere in the world. The only way that is achieved is through the barrel of a gun, where there is no democracy. We must learn in South Africa that when we believe in the same principles, we believe in the same outcomes, that we are able to work with people who also want the same things, who may not come from exactly the same tradition and history that I come from. If you're from an urban area, you must be prepared to work with somebody from the rural areas. If you're from affluence, you must be prepared to work with somebody from poverty. If you are from the corporate sector, you must be able to work with somebody from the social justice movement. That is how we're going to build a united South Africa. You do not win by staying in your corner and only talking to people who agree with you. That's not how countries and nations are built. Leadership is the ability to bring all of these people together, drive them towards a common goal, build the kind of broad movements that change nations. That's what Rise Mzansi is trying to do. You are never going to find a perfect politics and a perfect vehicle anyway. Stop with your purity tests. Join the struggle for a South Africa that we believe in. Be prepared to have the argument in those structures and win that argument and earn the respect of your peers, because you are able to be in the same room with people who disagree with you. That's what we're trying to do at Rise Mzansi. We have hectic arguments, but we are together. We're driving towards the same thing. Come in and join in the fun. It's not easy, but it's rewarding. Join Rise Mzansi. There's still time, by the way. Don't just vote. risemzansi.org/get involved. Do it now. Get on your phone.
Thank you so much for your time, your answers. Thank you so much. And thank you to you all for joining us. As I said, continue asking Songezo. In the next 2 days, we will answer as much as we can. We know they are very important questions, even about the future of the organization. The national leader has said Rise Mzansi is here to stay. And with that said as well, my call to action to everyone here who is a Rise Mzansi supporter, go out, endorse us, tell people you're voting for Rise. This is the time to influence other people as well. And on the ballot box, we will be on the national ballot, we will be on the bottom left. And you will see Songezo's face and put your X. Let us vote for new leaders because it is time. Thank you so much again for joining us, and good night. Stay tuned to our social media for what we will be doing in the next 2 days. Let's do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hal. And thanks, everybody. And cheers.